Today we're going to be working on this 4-drawer dressing table. Here's my inspiration for this piece. My customer specifically wanted a night sky with a golden glow. I started out by pulling this piece from my storage and cleaning it with Dixie Belle White Lightning Cleaner. Fortunately, this piece was in very good condition, so it didn't require any repairs before I got to cleaning it. I could tell by the age and the color of this that it was going to be a bleeder, but my rags proved me right. You can see by how dirty it was wiping away that the wood tannins on this were seeping out of the wood and will bleed into my paint. Once I cleaned the front of my piece, I made sure to come back and rinse my cleaning residue away with water. You also want to make sure you always clean the inside of your piece as well. Here I'm cleaning the drawer glides and the frame. I knew from how dirty my piece was wiping when I was cleaning it that it would be a bleeder, and so I needed 2 coats of Dixie Belle Boss. I chose Dixie Belle Boss in clear because I'm going to be using fairly dark paint colors, and I didn't want to take my dark finish to white and then have to cover it again with dark paint colors. Clear Boss goes on in a white, but it will dry to a clear. I applied my Boss in a cross-hatching pattern to make sure I had adequate coverage, making sure to get all around the frame and the inside as well. The next step on this piece was to sand the top with my Surf Prep sander. I knew I wanted a wood stain top on this piece, so I'm brushing on a pre-stain conditioner from Minwax. I made sure to use a water-based formula, knowing that I want to use a water-based stain. Once I have even coverage, I left this to dry overnight. Okay, here's our finished look that we're going to go for. There are still a few details that I'm missing on this front, but let's go ahead and see how we got to this paint finish. I'm going to go ahead and turn it to the side, and we'll do this together. Okay, here's our side that we started with our base coat of Boss. Let's go ahead and lay some paint on. So the paint colors that I'm going to work with are Midnight Sky, In the Navy, Stormy Seas, Bunker Hill Blue, Vintage Duck Egg, Holy Guacamole, and Lemonade. And then when I come back later, we're going to add some fluff as our clouds and our moon. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 colors going on in this. We're going to start with our darkest section first. I'm going to use my Dixie Belle Mini to lay on my paint. I know I'm going to use quite a few brushes here, but I'm probably going to share one in between my darkest blues, and then I'll have one that's shared with some of my lighter colors. So I'm going to start with my Midnight Sky, which is my darkest color. And I start by laying on my base a little bit darker than I want my actual paint finish. And that's because I can layer lighter colors on top of this and lighten it up. But if I come back and layer my dark colors on the top, it's going to cover up those light colors. So I'm going to start with a little bit darker base than I actually want. I'm just going to kind of outline this frame here because I know that's where I want my darker colors. My inspiration for this piece is a night sky with kind of a glowing effect. And so I want my outer portions to be my darkest. Now I'm not painting onto the legs of this piece because I'm going to come back later and I'm going to sand those down. And I'm going to stain those to match my wood stain top. Okay, so once I've got a basic frame in my Midnight Sky, let's start working in some lighter colors. I'm going to come back with some In the Navy. And I'm going to kind of swirl that in. That's a little dark, so let's do some Midnight Sky. The Midnight Sky is much, much more what I'm looking for. We'll use In the Navy later, but I think it's too close to the Midnight Sky for where I am right now. Okay, and I'm just going to use a swirling motion. I did not change my brush. I'm going to swirl that Midnight Sky in. I don't want to cover my Midnight Sky. Keeping in mind I want to keep my base nice and dark because I'm going to layer these colors on even lighter still in my next step. Okay, so that's some nice Midnight Sky. I am going to change my brush and I'm going to go to Vintage Duck Egg. I'm going to give myself a little bit of water because I have that Boss on here. It just gives the brush a little bit of bite, and I want it to kind of slide to get this Vintage Duck Egg on here. Give myself a little bit more water. And already you can kind of see how the stormy night sky starts appearing in there, even though this is just our base coat of paint. And then I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of lemonade and swirl that in as well. Okay, I also used on this a color I don't normally use, and that is Holy Guacamole. And I'm just going to take my holy guacamole, and this sort of gives a golden effect. It warms that up a little bit and just gives me a little bit of gold kind of mixed in there. Get a little bit more because I really want a golden night sky. All right, and I've got a nice dark base here, but this will be perfect for me to layer my next colors onto. Let's go ahead and turn this and we'll get our next coat onto this paint finish. Okay, this is the side that we did last week, so my paint is nice and dry on here, so we're going to go ahead and do our next step. So what I'm going to do is where I have my darkest colors, I'm now going to stair step them up. So out here, I'm going to start with my In the Navy and some Stormy Seas, and then I'm going to graduate. Where I had Stormy Seas, it will go to Vintage Duck Egg. Where I had Vintage Duck Egg, it's going to go to the Lemonade and the Holy Guacamole. And I'm going to cover each of my darker colors with the next lightest one. And that's going to show, it will give me an undercoat that will still show through some of these darker colors with the lighter one over top. And that's why I started with a darker base on this. Now I do want my sky up here to be a little bit darker. It's going to get a little bit lighter down here. So this is Stormy Seas that I'm putting over the midnight sky areas. I'm still letting my midnight sky peek through. I'm not getting full coverage. I'm using a swirling motion to put them on. And lots of water so my paint is nice and thin. I don't want to get that full coverage to where I can't see those colors underneath anymore. Now I'm going to take some In the Navy and I'm going to go back and darken these. And I get sort of this, I start getting shaded effect because now I've got 3 colors that are layered. When this dries, some of these swirlies kind of go away and you don't notice as much the swirls. But I'll show you also how you can, I'm using In the Navy right now. I'm still on my same brush that I used for the Stormy Seas. Okay, we're going to let this set up for a minute and then I'll come back and show you how I get rid of some of the swirls in the paint itself. So let's go ahead and go to our next lightest color, which is Vintage Duck Egg. And I'm going to bring that out a little further from center too. And I want to kind of work it in so it's a nice even transition to those lighter colors I just swirled on. Get a little more paint on my brush. I'm using very little paint. This is mostly water because my paint is going on very thin. I want those undercolors to peek through. And I'm getting a little heavy-handed up top, so I'm just going to re-darken this area a little bit. I don't want to forget that I want this top to come down a little bit further. Give myself a little bit of In the Navy and even a little bit of Midnight Sky to re-darken that. Still the same brush that I put my Vintage Duck Egg on with. Not worried about contamination because I have so little paint on my brush. It's mostly water. All right, I've got some swirl marks in here. This is a good spot, you can see it. I'll let my paint set up for a minute so it's not super wet, and then I can come back with a clean, dry brush, and I can just fade those out. And then you see just the colors together, but you don't see those swirly brush strokes. So I can get rid of some of those swirls by swirling them out with another brush. And then when it dries, you won't see those as much. So let's lighten up our center a little bit. I'm going to do that by bringing my Lemonade out a little further. On the front, I'm going to have a crescent moon that hangs, but my sides will have some clouds and stars. And then let's give it some Holy Guacamole for that sort of golden effect. But I want to make sure that I work that in. I don't want it too splotchy. I don't want these to be spots. So I want to make sure that I swirl it in, and then I can even use a bit of my Vintage Duck Egg to kind of blend that out. All right, and then I'm going to come back with my clean, dry brush and work some of these colors together. I'm not trying to get a perfectly even blend. I just want some of the apparent swirls in my brush strokes to go away. This is quite an arm workout. You will start to feel it. Let me give myself a little bit of lemonade down here. And the light colors over the dark is what gives that kind of glowing effect. And once my stars light up the sky, it will make sense why it's glowing. And then I feel like I'm a little splotchy with my holy guacamole. So let's balance that out a little bit. I'll just add a little bit more. Again, keeping in mind that this bottom portion is the lighter part of my sky. It's a little bit darker as we go up. And how about a little dash of lemonade? And we'll work those in too. And those will make, where I put the lemonade spots, those will make great backgrounds for the clouds that I'm going to add later. Because those would be spots in the sky that were a little bit lighter, and they'll be great backgrounds for the lightness of the clouds. We'll give ourselves some wispies up here. All right, and now I feel like I've got a pretty stormy night sky that will be a great base for us to lay our clouds on. Go ahead and pause. Okay, let's go ahead and start laying some clouds over our night sky that we just created. So the brushes that I'm going to use, I have my Dixie Belle Oval Medium out. I have a Dixie Belle Mini. It's kind of ratty looking because I just used it for my paint. And then I have a smaller artist brush. So the color I'm going to use is Dixie Belle Fluff. And I'm going to take my Dixie Belle Mini and I'm going to get a little bit of fluff on there. Barely any. I'm going to lay it off on the side of the container so there's barely any paint on my brush. And then I'm just going to kind of start and give myself some wispy cloud shapes in here. No rhyme or reason. I try to kind of follow the same shape as I'm going. We'll let this guy kind of brush off the edge and carry over that way. All right, and then I'm going to take my oval medium and I'm going to work these out. Okay, my paint is still wet. If I need moisture, I can spray my brush a little bit or I can mist my surface. But I do this all while my paint is still wet. Okay, and that kind of gives me my basic shape. Now these are good, but I wouldn't call them done yet. So now I'm going to come back and kind of start working this. I did not add any paint to this brush, so it's fairly dry. And I'm just going to give myself some darker spots. I'm going to dampen my brush a little bit so I can soften this out. And I'm going to pull some of that fluff down a little bit. Oops. Just kind of soften those edges with a little bit of a damp brush until I like the shape of my cloud. I'm going to take my artist brush because I want to add kind of some little darker spots so I get contrast in the white. I don't want it to be too cartoony, but I am going to soften those lines a little bit. This is just the fluff, but you're seeing my colors underneath are peeking through. And so it gives me this really nice soft effect. All right, so I think I like those guys, and this guy here, I might change this a little bit and bring this top up a little bit more. And then carry this guy over a little bit. And I'll just soften that, just the wet paint. Right, and up here I think I'm just going to do one very, very faint one with just a little bit of a dry brush. I did not add any paint to my brush. Kind of like that shape right there. Get a little bit of water on my brush. I just misted the tips of my brush, just one little spritz with my mister. Another mist. All right. I think I might darken up a couple spots on here. Just maybe right there. Just for a little bit more contrast. Super easy clouds with just using my Dixie Belle fluff for some fluffy clouds. I'll back up on it. Now that we've got a beautiful paint finish laid onto the entire body, I turn my piece back to the front and we're going to go ahead and lay on our moon. I did use the lid from a paint container from a gallon size because it was the appropriate radius for the crescent moon that I want to create. When I'm drawing on my painted finish, I do not use a graphite pencil. Graphite can bleed through your paint finish, so I am using a chalk pencil, which is a sewing tool, to just draw my moon shape on. I traced out the basic radius and then I came back and drew in the center. Now I'm going to fill it in using an artist brush and Dixie Belle Lemonade. I left my finish on the lemonade a little bit splotchy in spots because the moon doesn't have solid, even coverage. I did choose to hang my moon a little higher in the sky than my inspiration. That's just so it's a little bit more of a feature. And I made sure to choose my placement around where my hardware holes were. I did come back and shade my moon with a little bit of Dixie Belle Vintage Duck Egg, and I also used a little bit of In the Navy. Now that my moon is hung high, are you ready to see my secret to how I get stars in my night sky? I'm going to use a toothbrush. That's right, an old toothbrush is perfect for this. They do make splatter brushes that you can buy, but a toothbrush is much cheaper. I dipped the teeth of my toothbrush into my Dixie Belle fluff and now I'm misting it with a little bit of water. I want it to be nice and wet because I want to flick my paint at my surface and have it fling off of the brush. I'm just using my thumb to flick the paint as I move the brush over the surface of my piece. This gives me some more concentrated spots of stars, some that are more faint. The more concentrated spots just look like little galaxies and clusters of stars. Next, I'm going to take an artist brush and I'm going to use the back side of the artist brush, the wooden handle, and I'm going to use this to place some larger stars mixed into my smaller ones made with the toothbrush. You can use different size of paintbrush tips and get different size of stars mixed into your sky. Somewhere on this piece, I actually hid Polaris, the North Star, as well as the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper on the front of it. See if you can find them. Once I've got a good mix of smaller and larger stars in my sky, I'm going to come back with a liner brush, which is a fine-tipped artist brush, and my Dixie Belle fluff, and I'm going to make some larger, more ornate stars in my sky. Rather than just being the splatter or the dots for the other stars, these guys are going to be more ornate 6-point stars. When I'm doing this, I make sure to pull the brush away from the center. That way the center is more concentrated, and then there just fades out into wispy little brush strokes toward the outer edge of the star. All right, and with that, we've got a mix of stars in our sky, all different and varying sizes and locations. I would call this paint finish complete, except for some detailing with wax and our clear coat. We're just about there. With paint lids on, now Ginger can come in for some pets. With my paint finish complete, let's go ahead and add some detailing with black wax. I use black wax on just about every piece I do to some degree. In this case, I'm using black gilding wax from Dixie Belle. This is a fairly simple piece, but it does have these few carvings in it, so I'm just running an artist brush in the depth of the carving to give it a nice line. Then I'm coming back with a wider bristle artist brush and using that to feather those lines out. And the last step is I'll go back with a rag and just wipe it away to give it this nice hazy effect. For detailing with waxes, I always use natural bristle artist brushes, and that's because I need them to be a little bit more rigid than a synthetic bristle brush would be. I'm also going to use this same process to just darken the crevices along the sides. With my body all complete, my top needs some attention. I came back to complete some repairs that I had started on the top using Dixie mud. These were just patches in the veneer that I needed to repair using the mud and sand smooth. Before I can start staining, I also need to go ahead and sand my legs bare as well. I'm going to use my Surf Prep sander, and I attached a pad saver that's going to give it some flex along with an 80 grit sandpaper. While I had my piece flipped on its back to work on the legs, I made sure to take advantage of it being in that position to paint under this lip so that from any vantage point my piece looks complete. With my top repaired and sanded and my legs all sanded, my piece is now ready to accept some stain. I'm actually going to be using a weathered wood conditioner from Varathane. This is a water-based formula that causes wood to gray and weather naturally. This product brushes on really easily. I'm just using a chip brush here. I am going to go ahead and accelerate the process of the weathered wood conditioner just for camera because it's really interesting to watch. Here I'm using a heat gun just to accelerate the process. The weathered wood conditioner keeps the natural look of the wood but just grays it naturally, takes out the orange and the red tones in your wood. The grays in the weathered wood look really nice against my night sky finish. Next up, let's pay some attention to our hardware. I was thrilled that when I cleaned this hardware that I thought was going to be gold, it actually turned out to be silver. It was a little bit dingy though, so I'm just going to clean it up using a little bit of silver gilding wax from Dixie Belle. With my hardware clean, I just take a nice artist brush and dip it into my silver gilding wax, and then I can brush it over the surface of my hardware. This gilding wax does dry permanent in 24 hours, so I don't have to seal, but if you like to, you can also spray it with a spray lacquer after it's on and add another layer of sealant. Gilding wax is a really nice way to freshen up your hardware without giving it a spray painted fake look. Just giving it a light hit with the gilding wax on the top points makes it look like a fresher silver than it was. It's clear coat time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the drawers on this piece. I did choose to use satin clear coat from Dixie Belle, and I'm just going to dip my blue applicator sponge into the satin clear coat. The applicator sponge is damp. I prefer to use a damp sponge for application. That way it just glides along the surface ever so easily. It also helps so that your sponge doesn't fill up with your clear coat because it's filled with the water instead. When you dampen your sponge, just run it under a sink faucet and then squeeze it out until no more water rings out of it. I generally recommend 2 coats of clear on a body, and I usually do 5 or so coats on a wooden stained top. I'm using long, even strokes all the way across the front of the piece, making sure not to stop along the way because that will leave streaks in my clear coat. If it's streaking going on, it's going to streak when it dries. Let's go ahead and repeat the same process of clear coat onto the top. I see a lot of people that struggle with putting clear coat over dark colors, but it's actually a really easy process. So you want to make sure when you're brushing your clear coat on that you use those same long, even strokes all the way across your piece, making sure not to stop in the middle. I usually start in the middle when my sponge is the fullest, and then I can work that clear coat out to the ends of my piece. Each new stroke just overlaps the one before it ever so slightly. You'll notice here that satin clear coat has a nice long open life, so I can come and brush over it if I feel that my coverage isn't as even as I'd like it to be. Again, if it looks streaky when you're applying it, it's going to look streaky when it dries. Satin clear coat has a nice thick formula. I find it to be the most user-friendly of the Dixie Belle clear coats. This nice thick formula lets it have a nice long open life. It's very easily workable. It goes on with a little bit of a white or almost blue tint, and then it's going to dry clear so you can see where you've applied it as well. Once I've got this completely dry, I'm going to let it dry for at least a couple hours in between my coats, making sure that I rinse out my sponge in between. Clear coat can dry inside your sponge, so you want to make sure you watch it out in between each application. We are ready for some finishing touches. Let's put some hardware on. I make sure that even the insides of my piece get some attention and refinishing. The insides of your piece need some attention as well. This old wood gets dried out from age. I'm using Big Mama's Butter and Orange Growth Scent to moisturize the wood and then wipe away any excess. I also wipe it onto the glides of my drawers. And now our piece is complete. Let's check out our inspiration once again. You can find links for all the products I used in this video in the description for this post. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click the subscribe button. As always, you can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest as well.